Today's guest, I've seen him speak. He's incredible as a speaker. I have read his articles, and he gets it. He gets it, and I think this is what he gets. We're all living in the Wizard of Oz. That's what's happening. Globalist leaders are the wizard hiding behind the curtain, pulling all the strings. The deep state politicians are the wicked witch of the East, employing all kinds of bureaucratic flying monkeys to come after us. I know this sounds crazy, but I'll get you, my pretty. You and I were Dorothy, hoping that we're going to wake up in Kansas and realize it was all a dream. Right now, we're in the part of the movie where we're about to realize that the wizard is really actually a phony, and this whole utopia he's peddling is not what we thought it was, or at least I hope so, or else the flying monkeys eat us, I think. It takes a dark turn one way or another. The guest today is here to drive us towards a happy ending. But first, he will pull back the curtain on the powers that are behind everything, what he calls the controlled demolition of America. Who's behind our spiral into chaos? What's the motivation? And what can we do to stop it? Toto, I don't think we're in America anymore, but I'd like to get back. Welcome to the podcast, award-winning journalist, nationally syndicated radio host, the CEO of Liberty Sentinel, Alex Newman. Before we get to Alex in the interview, I know one of the things I want to talk to him about is preparation and really truly understanding what's coming and our responsibility to be prepared. I want to talk to you a little bit about Jase Medical. Jase Medical is on the same page that you and I are on, and it could be just a breakdown in the system. It could be just a shortage of medications or whatever. Or it could be something really, truly devastating. Too much of our medicine is made overseas. 18 out of the 21, basic fundamental ingredients that we have in our medicine doesn't come from the United States. Most of it's coming from China. That's why they would like you to have a personalized emergency kit. It'll contain 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections, but they are personalized. My daughter happens to be allergic to amoxicillin, so I don't have one. I don't have any amoxicillin in my Jase case. They also are working every day to expand the medication offerings beyond, well beyond just antibiotics. They have ivermectin in case you have a sick horse. And you can buy a gift card for your family or loved ones so they can get a Jase case. That's the beginning, okay? You should be empowered to care for yourself. You should be empowered to care for your family. Go to Jase Medical. Have a year's worth of supplies in your home. You can take all the worry away from it. JaseMedical.com. Enter the promo code BECK at checkout for a discount. Promo code BECK, J-A-S-E Medical.com. Alex, thank you so much for being part of the program. Thanks for coming in.
Here. Thank you so much for having
me. We were just talking before the podcast about how once your eyes are open, once you're awake, it changes everything, and you begin to understand. And I think the people who have been awake are becoming much more wide awake right now. It's almost like we had the jitters from so much caffeine, so much information. We know what we're facing. So let's see if we can get some people to just maybe, at least hit the snooze alarm and just wake for a little bit. You talk about all of the things that are important. In fact, your latest book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, is remarkable. And I want to go there, but I want to start with what you call the deep controlled demolition of America. And and I want to start here. There are those with ill intent, and then there are those who are part of something, but they don't necessarily know they're part of something, and they think they're doing good, right?
There's no question. In fact, that's kind of the world I grew up in, Glenn. We were taught that the UN was the hope for humanity, that this was the way we were going to end war, we were going to end conflict, we were going to end poverty. And the vast majority of people working for the machine genuinely believe that they're doing good. They may be okay with the idea that the ends justify the means. They may be okay with a little bit of lying here and there to bring humanity along.
Correct.
But the overwhelming majority of these people do truly believe when they go to bed at night that they're doing good for the world. It's when you get one step above that when you find the people with ill intent, the people who really do understand that they want tyranny, that they want to eliminate human liberty, that they want to control the lives and micromanage the lives of basically everybody on the planet.
But even them, I don't think, I mean, some of them probably, yes, but even them, they've convinced themselves that, yes, it benefits me, but it'll benefit all of humanity. I mean, Hitler, wasn't saying, how could I just make everybody miserable? He had even convinced himself that it was good, but it's harder at that level, I think. But
yeah, well, and that's what you find a lot with these guys. They've convinced themselves that they're so superior to the rest of humanity that their plan for our lives would be better than our plans for our lives. But I like to go back to the scriptures too. 3,000 years ago, David wrote in Psalm 2 about the kings of the earth, the rulers. Some translations of the scriptures say conspire. Others say they take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed. So you have people thousands of years ago who were working together against God, against God's purposes, against God's people. And these kinds of people are still around today. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they're in positions of authority in government and big corporations and media. And, the fruit of their wickedness is what we see all around us, our collapsing society, the war on the middle class, the attacks on our liberties. And so I do think there are really people with ill intent. Yes, they've convinced themselves that they're better than us. They've convinced themselves that there's too many of us on the planet and that they're going to do good by having a lower population. But it's wickedness all the same.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that, at least the way I read it with Donald Trump, is he's not in their club. He may have wanted to be in their club, but he's not in their club, never has been. Has this connection to America that club despises. He sees it as a great, light in the world, that it does, make people wealthier and happier and everything else. And this other group, all intellectual, who just really truly believe people like Donald Trump are dummies and dangerous. And I kind of feel a little like Donald Trump. I've never been in the, and I don't necessarily belong there, but I've never been in the intellectual cool kids club. All the people around me will all be like, oh yeah, we're going to have this big, and you're like, oh, okay, well. And Donald is like that too. Mm-hmm. What is that? What's caused that? What club is he not in?
Well, he's not in any of the really significant clubs of the people who like to think they run the world. Actually, before I wrote Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, I did a book, Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes, where I go through at least the critical organizations that are involved in this push for undermining national sovereignty, overthrowing our Constitution, eliminating individual liberty. And you've got a whole bunch of the really big ones that stand out, explored, like the Council on Foreign Relations, the policymaking class. So many of them come from that background. You've got the Bilderberg group. One of the groups that he has not participated in, which is unusual for somebody at that high level in politics, is the Bohemian Club. This group out in Northern California, they meet at this weird compound in the Redwood Forest. Mm-hmm. And actually, somebody hacked Colin Powell's emails, and he had sat next to, I guess, Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada. And so he wrote to his friend up in Canada, the former Justice Minister, and he said, yeah, we were just at Bohemian Club, and we all know Trump is going to be a disaster. So he's not from that world of kind of the elites. And he had some connections to them just by virtue of his wealth and his business. But he was pro-America, and he is pro-America. And his instincts have almost always been right. You know, we don't want the globalism. We don't want to surrender our sovereignty. We want to protect the middle class in America. Unfortunately, a lot of these deep staters, for lack of a better term, weaseled their way into his administration. They manipulated him on some key points. I suspect it'll be much more difficult for them to do that in a second term. But I think that's why they really don't like him, is because they don't control him. They don't have the leverage. They don't know what he may or may not do.
And he doesn't see the world the same way.
Right.
I mean, it's clear to me the reason why Donald Trump is so hated, not by the press or anybody else, but by that elite ruling class all over, is they've divvied things up. They know that trouble, they've known it since before 2008. Trouble is coming. Yeah. It's an opportunity to control the destruction of all of this. And as the Fabian Society used to say, rebuild the world, shape the world closer to our heart's desire. He's not in on that.
That's right.
And they have to stop. It's not that they hate him because of his tweets or anything else. He will be the one that stops that movement if he's allowed to really go forward, right?
That's exactly what he did during his first term. I mean, he was a one-man human wrecking ball when it came to the institutions of globalism.
I call him to his face, "You're a human hand grenade."
It's a perfect term. I mean, he's getting us out of UNESCO, the UN Education Agency. He's dumping the World Health Organization, the UN Relief and Works Commission, getting us out of the Paris Agreement. I mean, this, as far as the elites are concerned, is just absolute heresy. How dare you attack the institutions of globalism? This is what all enlightened people everywhere should believe. And so they're now, the elites are now ready to move beyond the nation state. They won't necessarily come out and say that as openly as I think they should. They won't necessarily explain the implications of that to everybody. But they're setting up these international institutions, this architecture of globalism, if you will. And they know that Donald Trump's instincts in favor of the nation state, in favor of patriotism, are a major, major problem when it comes to that agenda.
We know that this is true just because I think Brexit is a good example. Those people that were for Brexit did not hate Europe.
Right.
Okay. What they hated was bureaucrats from all over making decisions that didn't make sense to them and would make them less, or telling them, be less proud of your country. You don't have to be a hater of... Texas is a good example of this. I've never heard a Texan say, New York City sucks. I'm a Texan now, but not by birth, so I can say it. New York City sucks. What they always say is, where are you from? I'm from New York. Well, it's not Texas, but I hear it's a nice place. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's what people want. There is pride on where you're from, but it doesn't mean hatred. And this global elite wants you to sever your ties to all of your traditions, all of the things that you've done well, all of your history, absolutely everything. And that's what people are pushing back on. Who are you to tell me that my country, which I love, and I understand has made bad mistakes at times, needs to be forgotten and left behind? No, we matter.
Yeah. And that really is, I think, the core of the issue. And I've been outside the United States the vast majority of my life. I grew up in Latin America, Europe, Africa. So, I've seen all of that. And that actually, I think, has given me a greater appreciation of America. And America actually has, I think, a special place of hatred for the elites, not just because it's a nation state, but because of the principles that it was founded on. This is what they really can't stand. Yes, they want to undermine the nation state. They want to move toward these regional governments like the European Union, the African Union. Henry Kissinger outlined this in his book, World Order. So did Klaus Schwab. He outlined it in his book, Great Reset. But America, I think they especially hate this country because the principles it's based on are not compatible with their vision for the world. The principles that our founders enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that God created us equally, God gave us rights. The government's job is to protect these rights. I mean, these are biblical principles. God said, thou shalt not murder, so you have a right to life. God said government exists to punish evil, so the government should punish murderers and thieves. He said you have a right to property. And they can't stand those principles, so they have to destroy not just the nation of America, not just the physical space and the people, but they have to discredit the ideas it's based on. And I think we're entering that phase.
So do you think that it's the ideas are more important, like, you have a right to property and everything else, to them, that they hate that more than they hate the fact that you're just letting anyone have a say? You're just letting the unwashed masses, they're morons. You know what I mean? Which one do you think they go together?
Yeah. I mean, that's really the essence of America. America is different than other nations. Traditionally, nations have been defined by a common culture, a common language, maybe a common ethnicity, the Hungarians, the Swedes, whatever, the French, the Germans. But America is unique in that it's founded on these principles, these ideas, like we, the people, should govern ourselves under God. God's the one who gave us rights, not the king, not the government, etc. And they do want to ultimately undermine the nation state. You see, this is a institution that God actually ordained. You go back to Deuteronomy, you go to Acts, you see God is the one who divided mankind into nations. And so there is this effort to undermine nations as an identity, as an institution. But America is double plus bad, if you will, because not only are we a nation, a very powerful nation with a vibrant middle class, at least we were, but we're also founded on these principles that are fundamentally incompatible with their vision for the world.
When did this, there's always been people that, wanted to be the lord and lady, and you're a serf. That's just the way it is. That's the way God intended it. So that's always been there. But seems different to me. When did this start as so every institution, every higher education, it's all just packed with this attitude? When did that start? When did that happen?
Well, I think there's several different ways of looking at it. If you want to look at the rebellion starting in the Garden of Eden, and you see, the Tower of Babel, people have always been rebelling against God and his commands. But I think the modern iteration of this, especially in the Western world, is more recent. And what I think really defined the Western world was its attachment to biblical principles, the gospel, the spread of Christianity. That really was the essence of what the Western world was. Right. Yeah, there were some Roman and Greek influences, but primarily it was the Christian heritage. And as we have moved away from that over the last 60, 70 years, and of course the process began earlier, you see now all of the institutions becoming corrupt. And I think that agenda has been there really from the beginning. I think it's diabolical, but its success in the Western world is more recent. I'd say you could go back 100 years and look really at the critical institutions that are moving us toward globalism, like the Council on Foreign Relations. You go back maybe
Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, for example, the progressive movement. Yeah. But these trends were there before. You can go back to the mid-1800s. You've got Karl Marx. You go back before that, you've got people like Robert Owen. So there have been people with these ideas. There was a big, giant brick wall in their path, an insurmountable obstacle. And that obstacle, over a period of generations with constant warfare, indoctrinating children, that big brick wall that was in their way is now crumbling. And so now we see the manifestation of this so clearly.
So you bring up God. So let's go to an even bigger picture. When I said, when does it start? I think, when a third of the angels were lost, Satan is cast out. That whole argument was about individual choice. You are going to choose. You are going to, yes, you're going to suffer and you're going to, whatever, but you will have freedom of choice. Satan said, no, you don't want them all to suffer. You don't want all of that. What kind of person are you? I thought you were a good guy. Now you're making everybody suffer and you're saying some of us are going to be lost. I'll tell them what to do. I think what we're experiencing now is the same battle that is found in the falling of a third of the angels. And it's the same, I think it's the same argument as well. How do you get a third of the angels who are seeing God all the time, praising him, standing there? They know who he is. How do you get them to turn on him? You have to make him into a monster through compassion. You have to say, he wants some of you lost. He's not going to save everybody. He wants you to suffer. I'm telling you there's a way to not suffer. What do you think of that theory?
You're absolutely correct. And one of the things that you see, and this has been going on for hundreds of years, is this movement to try to make that exact argument, right? God is oppressive. God's got all these rules for your life. You know, how mean of him to say that you shall not and you must do this. Why not have total freedom? And you see actually a lot of self-proclaimed Satanists make these arguments. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, right? We don't need to obey those silly moral codes. Who does God think he is to impose those things on us? And for a long time, those kind of base instincts, especially in the Western world, were held in check because the rest of society said, no, wait, these are important. these are good things. But now we see that breaking down after a period of multiple generations of constant attack, indoctrination of multiple generations of children. And so we're now moving into a new phase of the battle. But I agree with you. This is all the same struggle between good and evil that's been going on from the dawn of humanity. And it's maybe a new phase in that battle, but ultimately the core of the battle is still the same.
So when you say Council of Foreign Relations, Bilderbergs, Rothschilds, the Club of Rome, those are all keywords to go, oh, and do you have foil on your windows? Right. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. They're all conspiracy. Many of them, when you say them, they're also a laser pointer to go, anti-Semite. What do you take me through those and show me how it's not a conspiracy, or what parts are false? Who are they?
Yeah, great questions. And I would say, first of all, there's two ditches that one can fall in on these issues, right? There's the one ditch, and some people fall into this ditch, that these individuals, these organizations are so powerful, they practically attribute divine, everything. Godlike powers. Nothing can happen without their permission.
Correct.
They run everything in the world. And that's ludicrous. Of course they don't. They're not God. They don't control things. And then there's the other ditch that one can fall in that says, oh, there's nothing to see here. That's just a nice nonpartisan think tank. Well, it's not just a nice nonpartisan think tank. And to go back to what we started this conversation with, certainly not everybody who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, they have about 5,000 members, is an evil-doing conspirator who wants to enslave humanity. Right? A lot of these people are people who would be nice to have a drink with, might be nice to have a coffee with, might be nice to have lunch with. They're people who believe what they're doing is good. There are people who believe that the world would be better without this attachment to national sovereignty, where more power and responsibility was transferred to international institutions like the UN. But it's a real group. It has been incredibly influential in setting policy in the United States for generations. Now, you can look at virtually every presidential administration for the last 60 years has been dominated at the cabinet level by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Doesn't matter if they're Republican, Democrat. You see these people they run a lot of the big media companies. They run a lot of the big banks.
Well, when you find out, anytime Woodrow Wilson is involved, red flags go up. But when you see why Colonel House, I think it was Colonel House,
Edward Mandell House,
that set it up because he felt the unwashed masses, they don't understand. And the media needs to be on our side. So we're going to come up with the policies because we're the elites. We understand it. We'll teach it to the media so the media can help teach it to the people. So it's a completely un-American kind of, it's a brainwashing center, really. That's how it was designed. Now, I don't know how long it took before it really became that, or if it ever fully became that. But that was the beginning thought. Am I wrong?
You're absolutely right. And you go back and you look at the origin of the CFR. You're right, Colonel Edward Mandell House was a key player in that. The reason they set it up is because the U.S. Senate refused to participate in the League of Nations. And they wanted to build this international architecture. They wanted government power to expand and manage the lives of people because a lot of them were these utopians. They thought the world would work better that way. And when it comes to this issue of anti-Semitism, really, I think it's absurd when people say that. Some of the biggest victims of these people and these agendas are actually Jews.
Oh yeah.
And when you look at the people who are running these institutions, David Rockefeller is a really good example. David Rockefeller is not a Jew. Nobody's ever accused him of being a Jew, and yet he was the chairman of the CFR for a long time, steering committee member on the Bilderberg.
Right.
He's been a major player in all this. And so when people try to say that's anti-Semitic, or when people try to say it's a conspiracy, I say, we need to define our terms. That is really ludicrous. And even the term conspiracy, this is something that the CIA tried to popularize as a term of ridicule. I encourage people to open up their dictionaries. The word conspiracy just means two or more people working in secret on some immoral, illegal, or nefarious objective.
Right.
So there are conspiracies all over the place. Nobody would be surprised to know that two businessmen conspired to fix prices. Nobody would be surprised to know that two politicians conspired to get something through the legislature. But we're trained, almost like Pavlov's dogs. We're conditioned to recoil in horror when somebody says the term conspiracy. Well, we shouldn't. The Department of Justice charges people with conspiracy virtually every day of the week in this country. So do state prosecutors.
Well, Cass Sunstein with Obama, wrote that famous argument, academic only, that to discredit people, you have to say this is a conspiracy theory, even if it is true.
Right.
You call it a conspiracy theory because it will at least slow everything down.
Yep. And they have a new term now that they've been using. I'm sure you've seen malinformation,
yes,
which is information that's true, but the elites have determined is being put out there for purposes that they disagree with. So it's amazing now that we're in a world where truth is no longer a defense, right? You can't say that even if it's true because, pick your term, conspiracy theory, malinformation, Russia, whatever it is. And I think as people who value truth, we should stand on truth, regardless of what nudgers like Cass Sunstein want us to feel when we're accused of being so-called conspiracy theorists or whatever.
But there is a difference, right? Like you said, let's define the terms. There is a difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
What is the difference?
So a conspiracy theory is a hypothesis or a theory about a possible conspiracy. And everybody comes up with these. I mean, we're human beings. We're not animals, so we notice patterns. I don't think it's wise to promote conspiracy theories unless and until you have evidence proving that it's true.
Correct.
But the fact that there are conspiracies is irrefutable. To go back to Psalm 2, 3,000 years ago, David was writing about the kings of the earth and the rulers conspiring, is how a lot of translations render that against God.
It's the way humans are.
Right.
It's the way we operate. And, if you want to define conspiracy only as bad and evil, well, there are good conspiracies, I think, as well. People that get together and say, you know what? I think doing X, Y, and Z, I think the secret part is where it starts to get a little nefarious. But we conspire with each other to move things forward, and we're always, on both sides, convinced that it's good.
Yeah. Well, and I think there is something in human nature where sometimes we justify things to ourselves that we know are not right. And I think there's a lot of that going on with the elites. To go back to what we started the conversation with, a lot of these guys justify conspiring with each other. And, David Rockefeller actually uses that term. To go back to David Rockefeller, if you get his autobiography, if you pick up the original copy, page 405, you'll see he's actually bragging. He uses the term conspiring. He says some even believe that we, talking about the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal, is the term he uses, that we're conspiring against the best interests of the United States with internationalists, or as Trump would have called them, the globalists, to build a more integrated one-world political and economic structure, a one-world order, if you will. He says, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. So by David Rockefeller's own admission, he is guilty and proud of conspiring with a secret cabal against the best interests of his own country to build a one world order.
Correct.
So how can somebody say there's no conspiracy? Well, the guy's bragging about it. It's a smoking gun confession. What more do you need?
I'm trying to remember the name of the professor. I think he was from Harvard. Wrote Tragedy and Hope.
Carroll Quigley.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton's mentor.
Right. And he comes out in Tragedy and Hope and says, there's this conspiracy. Wars will change. Everything he outlined is absolutely been happening ever since. And he said, we're doing it to build a more stable world so there's no more tragedy like World War I and number two. Wars will be different because we've tied all of our economies together. He was disavowed. I think he was with 5 different presidents. And once he wrote the book, they were all like, I don't know him.
They really threw him under the bus.
Yeah, threw him under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still not well known, with the average person that, they do admit this stuff. They do admit it.
I keep a copy of his books in my office, A Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, and also The Anglo-American Establishment. And what he says is so fascinating. He's like, you know what? I agree with these guys. I've been close to them for decades, he says. They even gave me a period of a few years to examine their secret papers. And I agree, he says, with most of what they're doing. He said, my chief difference of opinion is that they want to be in the shadows. They want to be secret. And I think their role in history, he says, is significant enough that it ought to be publicly known.
So that is the biggest thing for me on all of this stuff. I have no problem losing a battle, an intellectual battle, with somebody who's actually presenting the truth. You know what I mean? This is our goal. This is how we see things. This is the way we want to go. And somebody else saying the opposite. If you have that battle back and forth and it's honest, I don't have I may not like it, but I have less of a problem because at least that's what people decided. Mm-hmm. And who am I to say I'm wrong? They won't do that because, why should I engage with these idiots? Right?
Yeah. And I think there's also a sense they understand that if these ideas were to be discussed out in the open, they would lose, right? Say, hey,
but they lose because they're nationalists, they're small-minded, they're racist, whatever.
They're right-wing extremists and conspiracy theorists.
Right.
They've got these terms that they're and it's very unfortunate that multiple generations of children have now been conditioned in the schools to respond this way. It's not that they're thinking about the evidence or what you've stated. Mm-hmm. They're just conditioned to respond very emotionally to these trigger words. So it's not that they're listening to what you're saying and evaluating your argument, figuring out if it's a logical argument, if the conclusion follows logically from the premises. They're just having an emotional response. Like Pavlov's dogs were drooling. Well, there's a racist or conspiracy theorist without actually thinking about it. And so the people who are pushing these ideas know that if these ideas were to be discussed and debated openly, hey, we want to run your life for you. We think there are too many of you on the planet. We want to remove your ability to govern yourself as a nation. We want to move power and authority to regional and international institutions. A fair debate about that would absolutely crush this agenda.
Yes.
And so they can't let it happen.
Correct. You talk about how do you phrase it exactly? A backlash building among Americans. Can you talk about that? What is that? What do you foresee?
There's a massive backlash building, and you see it even in the establishment's own polls. There was just one that was released recently. Almost 60% of Americans see the media as the enemies of the people. So people get it. They understand that they're being lied to. They understand that their country is being systematically destroyed, and they don't like it. They may not understand it all. They may still be tuning into the fake media. They know the fake media is lying to them. They know the fake media is being dishonest, but they don't agree with what's happening. They understand something's wrong. And so I think this backlash is taking various different forms. And I think the big risk is that the elites themselves or the elitists will be able to divert that backlash, divert that anger into something that would be destructive or at least counterproductive. And so that's, I think, a real danger with this backlash is that it could be manipulated or misdirected into something that would be, again, counterproductive or potentially even destructive. And you see the CFR talking about this. When the Tea Party was around, they said, how do we channel all this anger and all this energy into something that at least will be harmless to our agenda? Correct. And there are very smart people who are trying to figure this out right now. What do we do?
That is the problem is, our billionaires on the right, they generally... I want results. I want it right now. And how is it good for me? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Where the left just seems to be crazy with their money. And they are also longer term thinkers in some ways.
Absolutely.
They will spend the money to plant the seeds to explore what can happen. And then you have almost every academic in the world on board with them. So anything that you think, they've already war gamed
Right.
forever ago.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you beat that?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're absolutely right about the wargaming. They've got very, very smart people, scenario planners, futurists coming up with, they did this with the 2020 election. They put together the Transition Integrity Project,
Right.
George Soros, the Podestas, all the rest of them.
Thank you for saying this and exposing that.
Right, and they came up with the four most likely scenarios. And so here are the four ways we think this could go, and then how do we respond in each one of these four scenarios so that we can get things to go the way that we want. So there are very smart people working on this. But again, it goes back to that other ditch that I described. It's important that people not fall into the trap of believing that these people are all powerful. They're absolutely not. If they were all powerful, we would have all been losing our liberty a long time ago. We wouldn't have still what we have in this country. And so I think to defeat it, we really need divine assistance. As our founding fathers said when they went to war with the most powerful empire of the day, we're going to rely on divine providence. We're going to trust God here. We're going to trust in the righteousness of our intentions. We're not going to trust our weapons. We're not going to trust in princes. We're not going to trust in our military. These are farmers, right? So we really need God's help in this battle.
So let me stop you here because this is so important. But if I'm listening and I'm somebody who doesn't understand it doesn't have the educational background to understand what we've said, haven't looked into all of the things that you've been talking about, will pick something up from the media and the left, and they'll say, you're a Christian nationalist. Christian nationalism, I think, is becoming one of the most dangerous. It's one of those things you war game. How can we use this? And there is real Christian nationalism. There is the majority, I think, of people that don't understand the booby trap that is.
Yeah.
People are starting to say that, our founders said this system is wholly inadequate for a non-religious or unethical population. So they're making the case now, well, we're not ethical, we're not moral, we're not religious, so this system's got to go. And you have now the right, some people on the right, making the case for extra constitutional powers and bringing the church deep inside the state, which is just as bad as what the other side is doing. And I don't think people understand. The average person, when they hear, well, yeah, I love my country, and am I a Christian? Yeah. That's not what Christian nationalism is. But that's what the media and the puppet masters are trying to make everybody believe is what it is on our side. So you go, yeah, well, I don't have a problem with that. It's a booby trap.
Yep.
Can you go into that at all and tell me your thoughts on, because I'm seeing it everywhere, your thoughts on people on our side asking for extra constitutional powers and making this case, well, times are different.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly dangerous, right? The Constitution is supposed to protect all of us. And I do believe the Constitution is one of the most incredible documents that was ever written in human history, maybe outside of the Bible and a handful of others. And what it did, probably the most enlightening document I ever read about the Constitution was a speech that was given by Samuel Langdon. He was the head of Harvard back when it was a semi-legitimate educational institution, to the New Hampshire legislature. He was trying to convince them to ratify the U.S. Constitution. And he explained how the principles of government that God had revealed to the ancient Hebrews in the Old Testament had been distilled and enshrined into what would become the supreme law of the land. And so this is a remarkable document. And we have an amendment process. Right? For the people who are on all sides, for the people who are advocating for a restructured system or even just the granting of new powers to the federal government, we have a process for that. I'd like to see some amendments personally. I'd get rid of the 16th Amendment, like
in a heartbeat.
Right, but we have to do this the lawful way. And the great thing about the Constitution is it protects all of us. It protects the godless and the pagans and the Christians. The rule of law is something that all of us should want, whether you're a liberal, a conservative, a libertarian, it doesn't matter. And so I too am very troubled by these calls to empower the federal government beyond what the Constitution allows, which of course has been going on for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And you see people on the right now saying, hey, the left is doing it, why don't we do it too? I think it's
you have
very,
nothing
very
left.
Right. If we lose that, it's chaos, it's anarchy, it's tyranny all at once.
We've seen this grow unnamed, at least unnamed by the left, in just the executive order. The executive order, you can see the damage that you cannot be one country for 4 years and then be the opposite country for 4 years.
Right.
And it's all tied to unelected people, the Congress surrendering their powers. Every solution that we need is just return to the documents.
That's right.
And I think people just think that you're just not going to be able. It's why the progressives forgot about the amendment process.
Yep.
Because it's too hard. Well, yes, it is hard. But keeping liberty is the hardest thing man has ever tried to do. And we've never gotten it right. So there is some effort that is involved. And I'm glad to hear you say you are as concerned, because I hear some big people starting to say this.
Yep. Hey, when Donald Trump gets back in office, the gloves are off. And I said, no, guys, that's really, really dangerous because, assuming Donald Trump gets elected for another term, somebody's going to come after him. And then they're going to say, well, hey, Donald Trump usurped all these powers. Why shouldn't we usurp all these powers? It's very, very dangerous. And you're absolutely right, too, about the solution to so many of the problems that afflict our country right now. Just go back to something really simple. Just have the federal government obey the Constitution. If it wasn't that huge, if it wasn't that powerful, we wouldn't be having these vicious battles against each other. It wouldn't be that important who won XYZ election because the federal government would be small. It'd be sticking to its constitutional responsibilities. If we had a discussion about what those responsibilities are, we could have those debates in our state legislatures or in Congress considering an amendment. But this effort to overthrow our Constitution, to throw off the shackles of the Constitution, from regardless of where it's coming from, is really, really dangerous. And I think people who do value liberty, people who do value our civilization, they need to say no.
Yeah. I think it's never been more important for people to watch international news, because once you see, wait a minute, the farmers are all up in arms in Germany and Italy and Sweden and England and America, and it's all kind of the same thing. Yeah. You start to realize this Trump-Biden argument is a show. It's all a show. I mean, it means something to them, but if we could just get past the personalities and then see and strip it all away and go, what kind of engine is being built here? What are we actually looking at? You realize, wait a minute, I may like Trump or hate Trump, but that's irrelevant because the same argument is happening all around the Western world, and Trump isn't there.
That's right. And you see this now. You see this populist backlash happening. We talked a little bit about it here in the United States. This is a global phenomenon. All over Europe, you have parties that want to crack down on the mass migration. You have parties that want to crack down on the war on farmers, parties that want to stop this out-of-control expansion of government, the censorship, the control, the surrender of sovereignty, both to regional and to global institutions. And it's been successful in a lot of places. I mean, Javier Milei in Argentina is a good example of that. Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil was a good example of that. I mean, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands just dominated in the last election. In Switzerland, even in Sweden, right? I mean, even in Sweden, you have the populist party rising just meteorically in their elections.
And that can be dangerous if it's not connected to principles.
Right. If it's not constrained by something like the Constitution and of course, principles.
Correct. So. Talk to me a little bit about the collusion, if you think there is, and conspiracy, if you think there is. It's awfully odd that everyone in the West has borders that don't matter.
Right.
And has, when you read about Ireland, and they're saying the same thing that people are saying, in New York, that are like, hey, we're overwhelmed here. It's not a coincidence, is it? What is the plan on that? Why is that being done?
Well, it's being done for a number of different reasons. I think the overarching purpose of it is actually to undermine the nation state, like we talked about, and also to undermine Christianity as a cultural force. And you see this so clearly in Europe. The most recent country I lived in before coming back to the United States was Sweden. And Sweden, of course, bore the brunt of the refugee crisis. I mean, it made what happened in Germany look mild by comparison. But you see this all throughout Europe, right? You look at London. Brits are now a minority in their own capital city. They have an Islamic mayor. They now have a pagan prime minister. This is a country that's been an officially Christian country for over 1,000 years. Something incredibly significant is happening, and nobody even wants to talk about it for fear of what they might be called. You look at Frankfurt, Germans are in the minority. You look at Brussels in Belgium. Belgians are a tiny minority in their own capital city, Malmo, Sweden. So this is happening all over Europe, and of course it will be happening here if this continues.
And would you agree with me? It wouldn't be bad if those people from other countries, no matter their color, religion, or anything else, wanted to be Swedish.
But they don't.
Yes, correct.
And I think that's one of the reasons why they're being imported. So what happens is you wake up one day and you look around and you realize all these people in your city, in your community, they don't speak your language, they don't share your values, they don't know your history. You have virtually nothing in common with them other than being a human being. And you say, well, what do we have these lines on the map for? Why do we need a nation state? Why not just be citizens of the world? And the UN has actually been fairly transparent that this is the agenda. They hired Peter Sutherland from Goldman Sachs. He passed away a few years ago, I believe. But he was made the UN migration czar. And he said in an interview with the UN News Center that they posted on the UN News Center website that what's happening here is a restructuring of the world. We are using this migration to undermine a sense of national identity. He says we have to get over the old shibboleths of borders and the historic memories of our own country. And so I believe this is actually the strategy. And I was in Hungary a few years ago. I was invited to the Prime Minister's office and did a 30-minute interview with their Secretary of State. That's exactly what he said. They're trying to undermine the nation state. They're trying to undermine Christian culture and Christian heritage. And you see it so clearly in Europe. It's not quite as obvious in America yet. But like in Sweden, you had the lesbian bishop of the Church of Sweden say, let's take down the crosses from the churches. Let's build prayer rooms to Allah in these ancient Swedish churches that have been there in many cases for 1,000 years. So it's the de-Christianization and it's the undermining of national cohesion and national identity.
So here's what I can't get past. With the WEF and the Great Reset, when you read what they talk about with food, the most frightening sentence in that entire plan that I read was, we are redesigning the entire process from seed to fork. What unbelievable arrogance, okay? That you're taking thousands of years of knowledge from farming and you're putting academics in charge who have all kinds of different, they might think that they're doing good, but there's no one stopping saying, wait, what are the unintended consequences? When they say we want a borderless world, okay, but what are the unintended consequences that are coming our way?
Yeah, and the intended consequences. You look at the war on food. I first picked up on this trend a decade ago. I spent years living in Brazil. I lived in South Africa. And so in South Africa, I saw the president of the country, Jacob Zuma, singing, literally, bring me my machine gun, we're going to shoot all the Boers. And, Boers is, of course, a people group, but it also means farmer. So why would anybody want to shoot their farmers? That sounds like a recipe for a disaster. So then I'm looking at Brazil. And I was being contacted by people I knew there, said, Alex, the government is taking hundreds of thousands of hectares out of production. They're literally wiping whole towns and villages off the map under the guise of giving this land back to this group of Indians who supposedly lived here hundreds of years ago. So I reached out to this group of Indians, the Savanchi Indians. They said, that's not our land. In fact, we don't even live in that ecosystem. We're from the Floresta, not from the Cerrado. Wait a minute. So South Africa, Brazil, they look at China. They didn't even need an excuse there. They just said, get off this land, peasants. We built you apartments in the cities. If you don't like it, we're going to torture you and kill you. So they move. Then you look at what's happening in the Netherlands. You look at Sri Lanka. You look at the United States. Different pretexts, right? Climate change, saving a desert tortoise, whatever it is. But it's all aimed at undermining the independent farmer and rancher. So where are they going with it? They want a system where food is entirely controlled and entirely centralized, literally from the seed, as you pointed out. They actually want to patent the DNA of the seeds and the livestock for every organism that we eat, and they're working on that. Right? Bill Gates, his dad was a patent attorney. They understood early on that controlling the intellectual property, controlling the food and the energy is the way to control humanity. So when you look at this war on farmers, it seems to me that the intended consequences is total domination of mankind.
Say that again. I heard you, but say that again. The intended consequences.
So, I mean, you look at the profit motive. Yes, a lot of the people involved in this, they want to make profit. They figure, hey, if we patent the genetic code for this new and improved corn that we created in a laboratory, or this new and improved goat or cow, we're going to make a lot of money. And of course, a company is obligated to make money. They're obligated to earn money for their shareholders. So that's the incentive at the basic level. But then you look at people like Bill Gates. This is a man who's got more wealth than anybody could ever possibly know what to do with. I don't believe it's about money anymore for people like Bill Gates. I believe it's about control. And you can really discern that just from what they're saying publicly.
But but it's not control just because, it's an ideology that he has believed in for a long time. We have to reduce the population.
Yep.
He's doing it for all of these reasons, but he's not being honest with anybody. He's not coming out and saying those. He's eating around the fringes of it. When you listen to his speeches, you can put them together and go, oh my gosh.
Yep.
But he'd deny that.
Of course. No totalitarian with any sense ever said, hey guys, I want to control your life. Hey guys, I want to take a lot of your money. I want to control what you do on your farm. No totalitarian ever said that. It's always packaged as, this is for your benefit. It's because I love you. It's because I know better. To go back to the Bible, Satan disguises himself as an angel of light.
Yes.
You'd be a lot less likely to fall for it if he showed up with some devil horns and a red tail.
And he never does.
Right.
And he never does. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the 50 and 5 plan.
So the UN has partnered with Bill Gates on this, what they call digital public infrastructure. It's a very fancy term. And I think the simplest way to understand it is they're building a giant digital gulag for all of humanity. So the UN Development Program has officially launched this. It was officially launched at the end of last year, where they're going to get 50 governments, they call them countries, but really they mean governments, to impose at least some major element of this digital public infrastructure on their population within 5 years. So 2028.
Like passports.
Digital IDs, and those are already emerging. In fact, many states are developing these now. I just went through the airport yesterday. You can scan your digital ID QR code, right? So that's happening.
And that's really one of the main reasons for the COVID
absolutely
nonsense.
The architecture that was laid down is the backbone of this global control grid that they're building. So then you've got the central bank digital currencies, which are already being unveiled. Right? They've already been released. The World Economic Forum just said a few days ago, 98% of the governments and central banks in the world are working on these CBDCs. Once they're fully operational, I guarantee you, they're going to start waging war on cash much more openly. They'll say it's a tool for terrorists and pimps and every nasty thing, tax cheats, everything you can think of. Then you've got the payment processing systems, and you've also got, we just had the head of the World Health Organization talk about this recently, the digital health certificates, the digital vaccine passports. They're taking what the EU developed during the COVID, which, by the way, the European Commission was promoting vaccine passports in May of 2019, long before anybody ever heard of COVID or anything like that. So they're taking all of this together, and they are using it to build a control system that will not just be able to surveil and monitor everything you do on an unprecedented scale. When you combine it with AI, the ability to make sense of all this data, it's just mind-blowing, but also to manipulate what you do. And so they're talking about this, again, pretty openly. If you look at the World Economic Forum meetings, they talk about the benefits of programmable central bank digital currency, where they will be able to say who can buy what, when, under what conditions. And then the Bank for International Settlements, Carol Quigley, to go back to him for a moment, Bill Clinton's mentor, the guy who really exposed this global agenda to create a one world system. He said the apex of the system was going to be the Bank for International Settlements. This is an institution that's almost entirely unknown to Americans. And what they are working on right now, and this is not a secret, it's not a conspiracy because it's not happening behind closed doors, is what they call a universal blockchain ledger. They want to tokenize every asset in the known universe, every farm, every car, every house, every tree, put it on this ledger, this blockchain ledger, and then you're only able to interact with this blockchain ledger using your biometric digital ID, using your central bank digital currencies. And so if I want to buy something from you, I can't just hand you a $100 bill. I've got to go on my device, connect to this blockchain system, transfer the central bank digital currencies to you. And so this is a mechanism for controlling humanity that I think is really unprecedented in human history. And when you take it all together, it's very obvious.
So I said this to an atheist the other day when we were talking about this. And I said, I don't know if you've ever read the Bible, but this sounds familiar. 2,000 years ago, this system sounds like the system that would be used by the Antichrist, where there's nowhere you can go, there's nothing you can buy or sell unless you have, the mark of the beast, as it's referred to there. But I'm not saying this is the mark of the beast, but I'm saying this is exactly what's described. Correct?
Absolutely. If you go to Revelation chapter 13, you have this description that 2,000 years ago must have really sounded silly.
I remember reading it in the 70s when I was a kid, thinking, that'll never, how do you do that? That'll never happen.
Yep.
Imagine 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Before computers, before
Right.
any of this. The system that the Bible says will force everybody, great and small, rich and poor, to take this mark to be able to buy or sell anything. And again, 2,000 years ago, that must have sounded positively ludicrous. Well, today we see, at least technologically, how this would not just be possible, but we're headed in that direction. Like you, I don't purport to know what might be the mark of the beast. I certainly don't claim this is.
No.
But you see the architecture being laid down where a situation could emerge where people could be prevented from buying or selling if they won't participate. And so, right now, I mentioned Sweden. You've got thousands of people in Sweden who have microchips embedded in their hand. A lot of this happened during COVID. For the first couple of years of the COVID, the government really took a hands-off approach. It was probably the freest country in the world when it came to COVID. But then they got a new government, and they started with the vaccine passports.
Oh, you're kidding me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so people got microchips. And this had already started a little bit before COVID. You could pay for your train fare. You could use it as your keys and your ID.
So it's just implanted just under the skin,
Right under
either
the
the
skin.
hand or the forehead.
Yeah, right. They haven't done forehead yet, but you look at Neuralink and you think,
and you
there's
think
a lot of interesting stuff coming.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you stop this? I mean, with AI, with all of the brains already working on the other side, with the governments all falling in line, with the media all backing that up, how do you stand without a bloody war? Have you thought about the strategies of getting and reversing this without and winning?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of different possibilities here. And I always say it begins with us as individuals. We have to change our shopping habits. We have to do our best to stop doing business with people who hate us and want to destroy us and start doing business with people who share our values in our own families. And I think this is critical. I would argue that one of the main tools that these elitists have at their disposal to move humanity in the direction that they want us to go is the government school system. So I would urge parents to think long and hard about the kind of education you choose for your children. It's one of the most important decisions you will make in your life. And you can prove that the people who created this system, who are running this system, do not agree with your values, are consciously working to undermine the system of government that we have here and to bring out this kind of global order.
And undermine the family.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the primary goals, and frankly, it always has been, if you go back and look at the history of how this system emerged. So, when it comes to the education of your children, pray and think about it long and hard. It's one of the most important things you're going to do in your life. And then, at the community and at the state level, we have a lot of options left to us. So take the CBDCs, for example. I'm from Florida. We have passed a law banning central bank digital currencies. Here in the state of Texas, you guys have a gold bullion depository. I've interviewed some of your legislators, Mark D'Orazio. They have a bill that's going to turn this depository into a mechanism that will facilitate commerce using gold and debit cards. So there's a lot of things we can do at the state level. And during COVID, this is a really good example. I live in a fairly rural county in Florida, very conservative. We have very decent people on our county commission and our city council, our governor and our legislature, all kind of were united, and we're not going along with this change. They flirted with it a little bit early on. But in my part of the state, we had basically life as normal for people who wanted to live life as normal. Our institutions weren't shut down. We were never forced to put masks on our face. Where then, I would fly to California or Illinois and New York, and it was just this dystopian, tyrannical system. So we need to develop.
There's still, because we have family up in the New York area, and they're still just freaked out by everything. They have fundamentally changed as people because of that experience. Here in Texas, you in Florida, we didn't.
Yeah,
we didn't. We went through some trouble, and we have maybe woken up a little bit more, but they have this weird fear.
And that's a critical thing right there. We must say no to the fear. It's so important. You're absolutely right. They change the way people think. I mean, they turn people against their own families, right? You can't come to Thanksgiving dinner if you won't take the shot. What? Well, what kind of craziness is that? So we have to reject the fear. And we have to work in the political process at the local, at the state level. To go back to the Constitution, two of our most important founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, James Madison, known as the father of our Constitution. Early on in our history, we had the Alien and Sedition Acts, where the federal government got a little bit too excited and they passed laws that were clearly unconstitutional. And so Madison and Jefferson created the Virginia and the Kentucky resolutions. This was basically saying, look, we are not going to allow this. And they both said the rightful remedy to federal abuses of the powers that were delegated to them under the Constitution was for the states to interpose. Even Alexander Hamilton, like the ultimate federal supremacist among our founders, said that states could refuse to cooperate with officers of the Union if and when things got really bad. So we have a lot of states right now. The Louisiana Senate just voted unanimously to ban these World Health Organization power grabs within their states. So if we had 25 or 30 Republican-controlled states say, look, we're not going to participate with the central bank digital currencies, we're not going to participate with the digital IDs, we're not going to allow you to shut down our power plants, take over the farms, it would be really tough for Washington, D.C. to be able to impose its will on all these states. But we need the political pressure from the public to light a fire under the high knees of our state officials to hold this back.
Let me play devil's advocate here. That's all well and good until the federal government says, fine, you don't get any money. We are so our states are so addicted to federal monies that, how long did we all drive at 55? Right. How long did it take Montana, that has a minimum speed limit of 45 in places, and really no maximum speed limit, because it's different. I remember going there driving, 80, 90 miles an hour because it was reasonable, straight, flat, and then having to go back and driving 55. It was like, this is insane. It was all about money.
Yeah. And you're right. That is one of the crucial mechanisms that the federal government has used to bring our states on board with this agenda. And not just on speed, on education, on energy policy, on transportation. All these different sectors have really been hijacked by the federal government. That's how they brought Common Core in, right? They used federal grants to convince our states to get on board. And so I think we're going to need states to stand up and say, look, we're not trading our sovereignty. We're not trading our liberty for money. And you'll get some constituents who will say, well, that's our tax money. We demand that you take it. But it's going to have to start at some point. And states are going to have to say, look, that's our line in the sand. take the transgender thing that's blowing up right now. The Biden administration has imposed these new understandings of really decades-old laws to try to force the transgender issue on every school. Well, if Tennessee and Oklahoma and Montana and Idaho and Florida and Texas and South Dakota and North Dakota all said, yeah, keep your money, we're not going to do that, what's the federal government going to do? It would be a really powerful example. It would be a really powerful check on federal authority. And at some point, all the Republican, right now, the House is supposedly under Republican control. All they got to do next time the budget comes around and say, look, no more funding for the federal government to bribe and bludgeon states into accepting these unconstitutional policies.
Absolutely. We seem to be the pace of the federal government gaining and creating more and more power has been breathtaking in the last few weeks, especially FISA, all of this stuff. They banned TikTok. It has to sell. But then in the same bill, it doesn't stop the new owner from transferring all of that information on all of us to China.
Right.
So what the hell was that? The laws that are being, not laws, the regulations that are just being pulled up, pretty much making it to where it's the Soviet Union, to where you show me the man, I'll show you the crime. How do you, have you war gamed this out enough to see an end game? Because at some point, as you say, it's boiling up. At some point, an event happens that just sets all of this into motion. How are you seeing that happening? Are we close? I mean, could the election be used? Is it the dollar that could collapse? What is your main concern on turning this machine on fully?
Yeah, the use of crises as a mechanism to grab enormous amounts of power. This is not a new innovation. I mean, we all remember Rahm Emanuel saying crises are a great opportunity to do things you didn't think you could do before. But if you go back 200 years, you look at the great French philosopher, lawmaker, Frédéric Bastiat. He identified this back then. These totalitarians, he said, are using the same laboratory to concoct the poison and the antidote. So we see that today. Back in the summer of 2022, I wrote a talk that I started giving around the country about how these evildoers use crises to move the ball down the line. And shortly after that, at the beginning of 2023, the World Economic Forum put out a big piece on how we were headed toward a poly-crisis, and that this poly-crisis was going to require, allegedly, these big expansions of government power. And so I think that's coming. I fully expect a currency crisis, an economic crisis. I mean, we're dealing with the border crisis. I think there's a very real chance that we'll see a crisis when it comes to our energy grid, either because of the regulations that the Obama administration and the Biden administration imposed, or a hack, a cyber attack of some sort. So
there's 1,000 ways catastrophic failure could happen.
Absolutely. And then they will use that as the pretext to say, well, we're going to save you from this. All you got to do is give up your money, give up your freedom, and we're going to protect you.
We're going to save the free market system by violating the free market system.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's what they do. And the sooner people understand that scam, the sooner they can, when it comes, say, no, we're not going to give up our freedom in exchange for... I mean, this was something that the Founding Fathers talked about, right? If you give up your freedom for security, you're going to end up with neither. It's just common sense. The totalitarians are not actually interested in your security or your safety. They're interested in their power. And so it goes back to the fear thing. We have to stop allowing them to scare us. And we have to recognize the patterns that they use. I fully expect a series of major crises. The 2024 election may be the catalyst. And to go back to the establishment for a moment, they war-gamed this out. Back in the early 1960s, the State Department commissioned a report. They hired a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield, member of the CFR, to work on this report. He had been involved with the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. The report, the title of the report gives it all away. It was a world effectively controlled by the United Nations. And it was supposed to be, how do we figure out how to go from basically the Westphalian system of sovereign nation states to this one world system controlled by the UN. And he concluded in there, people can get this report, the fastest way to get there would be to use war, the threat of war, and crises. That's what's going to change people's attitudes. That's what's going to enable them to do this. And so when we understand that, we're expecting them to do that, and then we can push back.
Are you optimistic?
It depends on what day you ask me.
Yeah.
So,
for me, it depends on what time
you're
asking me.
I mean, you
change throughout the day.
Yeah, and you look at the enormity of what we're facing. It's just sometimes overwhelming. Right? I mean, the forces arrayed against humanity, against human liberty, against the United States of America are almost incomprehensible. There's so much money and so much power arrayed against everything that we hold dear. And then I just say, but God. And I believe in the sovereignty of God. And so, yes, these people are very powerful. They've got a lot of money. They've got a lot of influence, but God. And so I don't know where this is going. I like to be optimistic, but I don't think it's right to just be foolishly optimistic. I think it makes sense to prepare for tough times. Proverbs talks about the wise man sees trouble coming and prepares himself. He makes prudent precautions. So I think we need to operate with that understanding, not out of a sense of fear, out of a sense of love for our families, for our neighbors. But regardless, even if I was 100% convinced it was over, and I'm not at all, I do think we can still stop this evil. But even if I was 100% convinced we were going to lose, I would probably be doing the same thing.
Me too.
We have to stand for truth. We have to stand for what's right, and we'll trust God with the results.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was much more on edge, really before COVID, because I hadn't completely surrendered, but God.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do, you realize your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
He's not coming in and doing it. He's not a helicopter parent.
Right.
You got to do your homework,
Mm-hmm.
because he'll let you sit with that grade at the end. But I've come to this place that I trust him so much. I know that he's going to let us sit and learn from our lessons, because that's what a good dad does. But in the end, it's amazing. Jesus was a carpenter, and it's perfect for me, at least in my head, the analogy of a carpenter. You're sawing wood, there's sawdust on the floor. But with God, there's no sawdust on the floor. There's no waste. Even the bad cuts that you make in wood that you're like, gotta throw that one out. He doesn't. When God, all of the bad will turn out to be for our good. And when you can get to that point, and surrender to, all I can control is me, my emotions, and how I live. And the best thing I can do to serve God is to serve my fellow man, and be a good example. Because that is going to be hard. I've said this for 25 years, that I believe my audience is going to, even if it's in fragments, it will be there to save the Republic, the ideas of the Republic, just by being good. When everyone is freaking, if you have the knowledge and you've already come to that place spiritually, you're like, but God.
Right.
When everybody's freaking, you can say, no, don't go that way. Knowing that a lot of people will go that way, but you'll be able to pull some people in the right direction and protect and save those fragments.
Yep. And when you look back to the Old Testament, I encourage people to read the Old Testament. There are so many examples of these battles that look absolutely impossible. And God steps in and helps. And so you look at Gideon, for example, right? God takes 300 men and crushes this massive army that had come against God's people. And so, if we do what we are responsible for, we can trust God with the rest. And I also encourage people to just look back at the history of God's people resisting evil. Daniel chapter 3, I think, is something that all of us need to go back and revisit. God's people are in captivity in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's got this big golden statue, and he commands that everybody bow down and worship it when the music plays. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond and say, look, King, we're not even careful to answer you on this. Our God can protect us. But even if he doesn't protect us, we're still not going to bow down to your golden idol. And if more Christians, if more God-fearing people in this country took that attitude of, look, our God is strong enough to protect us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to this giant golden, and it's not going to be a golden statue for us. It might be something different, but
it'd be just our job,
right? Whatever it is, whatever thing that we're being told we have to bow down to that God has commanded us not to do. If we stand on truth, if we trust in God, we can be confident that no matter what happens, it's going to work out. And that doesn't mean God's necessarily going to protect us from the fiery furnace, right? There may be serious consequences of saying, no, I'm not going to bow down to the golden idol. But if more people learned to trust God, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trusted God, like you just described your trust in God, I think it would give us the backbone. It would give us the courage to do what's necessary. And our history is that. I mean, you look at our founding fathers. They quoted the Bible more than anything else. They had faith in God and divine providence, and they took on the most powerful military power in the world, and they won.
Yeah. And part of the reason of that is George Washington knew this is where the Purple Heart comes from. Badge of merit. Mm-hmm. Do something that will find favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Yeah.
Do something, help people, be good. If we exercise that sounds so ridiculous. It sounds like, hey, why don't you march around these walls for 3 days with a trumpet?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds ridiculous,
yep.
but it does,
Yeah. Overcome evil with good. Love your enemies. They're so counterintuitive.
I know.
And yet that's what God told us to do, and the power of that is unbelievable.
I have to tell you, my staff reminded me when we were going over, all the things I wanted to talk to you about. And they said, do you remember this? Do you remember this? Do you remember this? I think you may be the writer that I have sent to my producers and said, read this, read this, read this. I'm not sure, but you're at least probably in the top 3. I think you're by far number 1, actually.
Oh, appreciate
of taking your stuff and using as an example of this is right. This is the right direction. This guy gets it. So thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it very much. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for all that you've done for all these years for the truth and for our country. God bless you.
God bless you.